if Biden is reelected, we as a community need to be prepared to have an arsenal of legal resources because
Mhm.
4 more years of this critical uh, crypto agenda just means there's going to be more enforcement actions, more lawsuits. And while the industry has gotten many favorable results over the past couple of years, I don't think these attacks are going to slow down.
This content is brought to you by VeChain, which is a leading enterprise-grade Layer 1 public blockchain spearheading a digital revolution from a sustainable, highly scalable smart contract platform. The VeChain blockchain has many unique features, which makes it an ideal choice for Web3 applications. VeChain is working with many great enterprises such as PwC, Givenchy, BMW, and Walmart China. Most recently, they partnered with the Boston Consulting Group to build a revolutionary decentralized application ecosystem. I'm a big believer in this project. I have been since 2018. I've been a VET token holder for years. And this blockchain is highly scalable, great with security and speed, and it has low energy consumption. If you'd like to learn more about VeChain, please visit vchain.org. Link will be in the description. Welcome to the Thinking Crypto podcast, your home for cryptocurrency news and interviews. With me today is Perianne Boring, who's the founder of the Chamber of Digital Commerce. Perianne, great to have you back on.
Hey, Tony, good to be here.
Perianne, there's so much going on in the crypto industry. Yes, we have Bitcoin breaking new highs and all that, but as it relates to politics and regulations, there's so much going on, and I have a lot of questions for you. Let's start with Kraken because Kraken filed a motion to dismiss against the SEC with their lawsuit. You and the folks at the chamber filed an amicus to support them. And then you had 8 state attorney generals backing Kraken now. I would love to get your thoughts on the entire situation there.
Yeah, it is an extremely interesting case to watch. And for those who have been following, most of the major cryptocurrency exchanges in the United States have all received enforcement actions from the SEC, and a lot of them are in the middle of litigation. So this is all going to the courts. Just to kind of summarize in general, very high level, what this is all about, it really comes down to the SEC trying to expand its jurisdiction as far as it can get its tentacles into the cryptocurrency space. So kind of the age-old question and the age-old debate, and this precedes Chairman Gensler's SEC, is where is the line? What cryptocurrencies are considered a security and which ones are not? And Chairman Gensler is really saying that, well, all of them are. Which of course is not correct. So, and then they came after Kraken, saying you're trading and you're listing essentially unregistered securities. So now they're in litigation over that. So they have filed a motion to dismiss. They're asking the court to just completely dismiss the entire case because of how faulty the SEC's arguments are. And one of the biggest faults with the SEC's analysis is there's no limitation doctrine. So where does the end start? So there were some like really funny conversations about like, hey, well, if this logic applies to cryptocurrency, that means that like anything that could appreciate in price would be considered a security. So like, are my Beanie Babies unregistered securities? What about like my Nike shoes? Like, some people, sneakerheads buy those, save them, and they may sell them for more money in the future. Like, are those now securities? Of course not. So that's really what it's come down to. So they've filed a motion to dismiss. Our amicus brief supports Kraken. And we really just, agree with that notion that its legal analysis of cryptocurrency is deeply flawed. And if the SEC wants to expand it, well, the SEC cannot expand its jurisdiction, and the courts need to enforce that. Only Congress has the statutory authority to tell the agencies what their regulatory powers are and what they apply to. They can't just unilaterally say, okay, now we oversee this. That's just not how the rule of law works in this country. And so they're trying to like assert that jurisdiction. Kraken saying we need to dismiss, and then we don't want the courts to kind of endorse this because only Congress can give that type of authority to any regulatory agency. We don't want to set a bad legal precedent. So we filed our brief on Tuesday, and then on Thursday, there was another brief that was filed with 8 attorneys general. Their brief was not in support of either the plaintiff or the defendant. They were really just filing on their own behalf as a friend of the court, but their core argument did coincide with the exact same arguments we were making. They weren't necessarily getting into it. Do we support this or support that? It's more, we're the states. We have jurisdiction in this space.
Right.
We don't want the courts to endorse the SEC expanding its jurisdiction without congressional authority, because that then completely messes up the entire regulatory framework for the federal government as well as the states. And again, that policymaking needs to happen with Congress. So it's really rare that you would see attorneys general get involved at this level of a case. It was extremely positive overall for them. While they didn't, submit a brief necessarily on behalf of Kraken, it did endorse a lot of the exact same things the cryptocurrency industry is making, including us. And Kraken. And it really just shows that the SEC's approach to cryptocurrency is flawed.
Yeah, absolutely. And Perianne, I would love to get your point of view as to what's happening in DC as it relates to the SEC and how Democrats and even Republicans are viewing the SEC now, because they got called arbitrary and capricious in the Grayscale case. In the Ripple case, they lost a significant part of that lawsuit. Obviously, it's still going on. In the debt box situation, they got the judge threatened to sanction the SEC lawyers. And then you have the SAB 121, which the Government Accountability Office said is unlawful. So has the point of view of what Gary Gensler and the SEC are doing, has that changed, especially on the Democratic side?
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion to have. And the Securities and Exchange Commission, as well as most of the other regulatory bodies, they weren't political. They weren't originally created to be these vehicles to execute a political mission. Most of the commissioners at the Securities and Exchange Commission today don't have actually any experience working in the securities space. They're political appointees.
Wow.
It didn't used to be like that. It used to be very boring. The conversations were, really technical, ensuring that, companies were following the appropriate disclosure requirements. But it's transformed over the years, which is why personally I'm a proponent of full political reform in this country. And this is just kind of one example of that. But it's turned very political. And so obviously the Democrats are in charge, with the Biden administration. Chairman Gensler was selected by the president to serve in this role, obviously confirmed by the Senate. But a lot of what we see at the SEC and other agencies is they're effectuating a mission that's driven politically, and that's really disruptive to the markets. And that's why you see really big shifts from administration to administration, which is also extremely disruptive to the market. So this is, it's turned very political. We would like to see it get back to, more of a technical agency and leave the politics, somewhere else.
What do you think about, and I don't know if you've seen this, but Warren Davidson's Restructuring the SEC Act? I think it makes logical sense where, it's more balanced and less political. Have you seen that?
I have. That's, definitely a part of, these key themes of, instead of having a chairman, and in this particular administration, Chairman Gensler is really running the organization through the chairman's office, but it's meant to be a commission where you have 5 commissioners and you have a chair, but each commissioner plays a significant role in the oversight of the SEC, and that's really not how it's being done in practice today. So what Congressman Warren Davidson is putting forward is something that would put it back towards more of like a typical board structure where you have multiple, commissioners or board members who can level each other out in the event that politics start getting involved. And of course, you have, a certain number that are appointed by a Republican, and a certain number that are appointed by Democrats to try to make it less political. But it's a good proposal, and I think the spirit of that we certainly agree with. And ultimately, we need to get politics out of the regulatory process in order to have efficient markets.
Now let's talk about what some would call SAB 121. I've been calling SAB 121, but on the House, in the House Financial Services Committee, I think they voted to repeal this, but it has to make its way to the House floor to be voted on. I would love to get your take on that. And do you have any idea when that vote may take place?
Yeah, so SAB 121, this is the Staff Accounting Bulletin, or SAB SAB 121. These are custody rules that were issued by the SEC on digital asset custodians. And what they say is that if a custodian is holding a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin on their balance sheet, then they have to have 100% reserves of another asset like cash. These are completely unworkable. This really makes it financially, there's no business case there. It completely, makes it really unworkable and this applies to institutions. So our biggest, custodians in the world, this is who this really applies to, banks. In order to, custody digital assets, it's really, makes it, financially impossible. They're totally unworkable. And it's proven to keep institutions out of the cryptocurrency space. So, from my perspective, as we continue to grow the cryptocurrency space, our work here at the Chamber of Digital Commerce, we're working to promote the acceptance and use of this technology. We want to support the adoption, of course, obviously done in a responsible way. But this does the opposite of that. As we continue to grow and mature, there's corporations and institutions and bigger players who need to have institutional appropriate custody solutions in order to engage in our space. Without that, you're not going to see institutions enter our space in a meaningful way. So it's kind of like a way to prevent adoption of certain types of actors in our community. Once this came out, we were obviously adamantly against it, all of our members are, and we did a lot of work on the Hill to educate members of Congress that, hey, our biggest institutions in the world here are the biggest institutions that we serve here in the United States. They are not going to be able to compete globally with these types of draconian requirements on them. We need to make sure our institutions can compete, and they can't with this. So that led to the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, doing a review of the Staff Accounting Bulletin 121. They issued a report late last year that found that the SEC violated yet again the Administrative Procedures Act and the way they rolled these out, and therefore Congress can nullify or repeal SAB 121. So a couple of weeks ago, or last month, a joint resolution was introduced in both the House and the Senate to nullify or repeal these rules. That passed the House Financial Services Committee last Thursday with bipartisan support. That's really big. So we're talking about politics, right? So, the SEC is obviously run by someone who's appointed within a Democratic administration. A lot of times the Democrats, they want to support their party, so they don't want to be critical. For them to vote in support, to have not one, but 3 Democrats vote in support of a Congressional Review Act, essentially saying, hey, the SEC, like, you guys did this wrong, is major, extremely difficult to do in the political environment that we're operating in, which just goes to show the egregiousness of what's happening at the SEC today. So that's passed House Financial Services Committee. It needs to go to the floor. Because it had bipartisan backing, its likelihood of passing the House is quite high. And then it will go to, there's already been a joint resolution issued or introduced concurrently in the Senate. That only needs 2 Democrats to pass the Senate. So we can get this done. It won't be easy, but it is attainable and achievable. And our staff is working around the clock to secure the votes to fully repeal these onerous rules on the crypto space.
And I saw, if I'm not mistaken, the banks, collective group of banks, did send a letter. I don't know if it was the SEC talking about this, that they can't custody like Bitcoin ETFs. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm not getting confused here. Part of it is SOP 121 wouldn't allow them to do that. Is that correct?
It has proven to deter all the institutions, including banks, from offering custody solutions. And of course, they don't want to be limited of what types of assets they can custody. So the banks are against this. It applies mostly to banks. But these are draconian crypto rules, and it's going to prevent institutional level adoption of cryptocurrency if these stay in place, and it already is.
Hmm. Question for you, and this might be a tough question to answer. We know Elizabeth Warren is working closely with Gary Gensler, and she's been the one very vocally, publicly about being against crypto, forming an anti-crypto army. There's reports that she's sending Gary Gensler questions and answers ahead of hearings and things like that. Um, However, do you feel both her and Gary have lost some of the wind in their sails with all these losses in courts, all these bad optics, and then with the election coming up, could they potentially pivot a bit or soften their stance? What do you think about that?
You might see that. I mean, I think they've already done a lot of collateral damage across this country. I think there's a lot of ground that's already been lost. There's so many different crypto projects and innovations that Americans are geofenced from accessing, due to a lot of these efforts. So in many ways, they've won on a lot of fronts. As you know, Elizabeth Warren has introduced a bill that would effectively ban cryptocurrency today, and there's 19 co-sponsors on that bill. So basically 20% of the US Senate is on record of banning cryptocurrency. We've been very loud about that. We also kind of feel like our backs are up against a wall. Like if you're coming at us trying to completely wipe out the entire industry, there's no other appropriate position for us to take as cryptocurrency advocates. And that's kind of why we've been so strong on this. But there is an election coming up, and it's interesting. So this bill that Elizabeth Warren has spearheaded, we've met with every single, 19 office. One of the offices, when we were like, hey man, like this ain't cool. Like, why are you trying to ban us? Like, just tell us straight up, like, what is this about? And I won't tell you who said this, but what they told me is that, their boss basically just thought crypto was a throwaway issue. That's the word they used. That
Wow.
all they really knew, all the senator really knew, and of course, most senators don't even send their own emails, so they don't have a great technical knowledge of our space. We're working to improve that, and we've made progress, but there's still a lot of work to do on the education front. But what this member office told us was that all they really knew was FTX and this huge, collapse. And like, no one cares about crypto anymore. Like it collapse, it's done, it's a fraud. Like that was like what they actually thought. So
Hmm.
they were thinking, oh yeah, we'll do Elizabeth Warren this favor, and
Wow.
crypto's a throwaway issue. No one cares. No one's even gonna notice. And that's why they're on it. And we're like, what? So we have to show Congress crypto is not a throwaway issue. You made a mistake. People do care about their access to, technology and financial technology, and don't take that away from people, especially while we're going through such turbulent, economic and financial times. Don't take options off the table. Don't remove choices for Americans. So that's what we're doing. And will Elizabeth Warren change her tune now that, the elections are a couple months away? I don't know. To me, it doesn't really matter.
Hmm.
We know her position. She doesn't want us to exist. She doesn't think we have a right to be here. And we're obviously fighting back.
It's funny as you're saying about these other senators who are banning, who are joining her in this, but they don't have a clue. It makes me sad at the same time, but also optimistic because it's like, okay, it's a lack of education, and they're just jumping on the ship with Elizabeth Warren. But you guys, for example, are in DC educating, bringing awareness. So that's the good part. There's a solution, but it's just sad that it's like, oh, we don't know about this, but we'll just follow Elizabeth Warren.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and I do think we can win this one. I do think we can totally kill this bill. But it's going to take the community's support. So again, there's 19 members on this bill. It's called the Digital Asset Anti-Money Laundering Act, or S2669. You can look it up on congress.gov. You can look up the list of 19 senators that are on it. Call them, show up to their town halls and say, hey, why are you trying to, essentially ban crypto? They may not even realize that's what the bill does.
Mm.
Put them on record, that make them defend their position. And if they signed on to this bill and they didn't realize that it effectively bans crypto, and that's not really what they're supporting or endorsing, then tell them to get off the bill. If they made a mistake, get off. They have, the option to do that. But we're going to need the community's help to do that.
But Perianne, even with the Bitcoin spot ETF approvals and big names like Fidelity and BlackRock involved, are these people such in a echo chamber or in their own bubble in DC that they're not seeing that? I mean, I understand if it was like a small crypto company at launch a Bitcoin ETF, but BlackRock, world's largest asset manager, are they not aware of that?
Well, I think everyone is aware of the spot Bitcoin ETFs at this point because it was so highly publicized, the launch. But despite the ETFs launching earlier this year, and I mean, I'm just looking at your Bitcoin clock behind you, despite the price being at like 64, 65 at this time of recording on March 5th, there's still 19 members on this bill, right? Like, why haven't any of them remove their names? So I am extremely optimistic in the long run, but we still have pretty significant battles that we're facing today.
Sure. Now, let's say Biden wins the election. And for the folks listening, I'm not trying to say I want Biden to win. I'm just saying in this scenario, because people get very upset about politics. But let's say Biden does win. Do you see Gary Gensler retaining his role, or will he be swapped out?
So he's serving a 6-year term. So when his 6 years expires, I think he can stay on for one additional year. But they would have to nominate somebody new. I don't know how long he would stay, but he has 6 years that he can stay. But I think overall, if Biden is reelected, we as a community need to be prepared to have an arsenal of legal resources, because 4 more years of this critical crypto agenda just means there's going to be more enforcement actions, more lawsuits. And while the industry has gotten many favorable results over the past couple of years, I don't think these attacks are going to slow down. It's I think it would require significant legal resources, and we should be prepared for that in the event that is what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And man, it's even though, like you said, we're winning and we're fighting back, it's costing a lot of money. Some of these companies have to pay incredible amounts of capital to fight, and with legal fees and so forth. Now, speaking of election, John Deaton is running against Elizabeth Warren. I would love to get your thoughts on what's happening there.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm glad that John is running because that's been a tough seat. The general, I guess, idea or agreement is that this is a significant blue state, and it's just hard for a Republican to win, which is why there wasn't really any like real GOP challenger to Elizabeth Warren. And I'm not totally sure how John ended up being the person, but I'm glad he raised his hand. And I know he told me that he's putting his own money into his race and his campaign because he believes that he can win, and he believes we need somebody better in office than this woman that wants to ban crypto. And I totally agree with that. I do have a little bit of history with her, her district. When I worked on the Hill, Scott Brown was the Massachusetts from Massachusetts, and she had challenged him when I was working on the Hill, and I watched that race very closely when she originally won. And Scott Brown only lost by a couple of percentage points. So it was a closer race than what I think people realize. But I think it just goes to show that the American people do not want people in office that are taking away their access to any type of technology, and that they don't want people, that they want better options than people who are trying to limit their access to options and choice.
For sure. Look, I know it's going to be an uphill battle for John. Elizabeth Warren has got her war chest. She's got a lot of notoriety, branding, and so forth. But John at least has a lot of, I think, the entire asset class of crypto behind him in the industry, and crypto holders, and maybe the macro factors of what's happening with the Biden administration, the border, and all the other problems we're dealing with. Maybe John has a chance here, and it would be amazing if he's able to unseat her.
Yeah, it would be an incredible victory for anyone in the crypto space, but also just people who are proponents of freedom.
For sure. The other thing that we saw pop up recently, the EIA, bringing up energy FUD again. I feel like it's 2017. It's like deja vu. I don't know, maybe every 4 years they're going to bring this up when the price is going up. We saw the Texas Blockchain Council launch a lawsuit. They won that. We'd love to get your thoughts on this. Is this another Elizabeth Warren agenda to try to, stop Bitcoin mining and things like that?
It was. It absolutely was. I shared a clip on my Twitter account just a couple of days. It was a post that Brian Morgenstern had shared, and it was an exchange with Elizabeth Warren and the EIA. That's the Energy Information Administration. And it's Elizabeth Warren really, I mean, she's pressuring the EIA, in a congressional hearing, saying, you need to issue this mandatory survey. She says, TikTok, time's clicking. Like we need to get this information so we can, address, our concerns with cryptocurrency mining. So this absolutely, I mean, from my opinion, was a politically motivated effort. What this was is, an emergency mandated survey on 82 Bitcoin and cryptocurrency mining companies. And it was a mandate. So if you don't respond, there would be charges of thousands of dollars a day if you don't respond to the survey. And it required them to fill out some extremely sensitive information. The kind of interesting thing here is that, mining is, happening on a blockchain. You have more information about cryptocurrency mining than any other type of mining you could think of. There's a lot of data that is publicly available to anybody. So why do they need, this type of information from the industry? We're not against data collection. We're not about sharing information, but we're absolutely against the government abusing its powers. The way this emergency order was issued did not follow the appropriate process. So our the teams of lawyers that we worked with they found at least 6 mistakes that the EIA made. You have to check a bunch of boxes in order to issue a mandated emergency survey. You have to prove there's an actual emergency. They said it was cold in Texas, and that was the emergency, despite there not really being any issues with the grid. And then there's other, procedural things that have to be done. And we found there was at least 6 things that criteria they didn't meet. So that's why there was a lawsuit. So the lawsuit was filed by the Texas Blockchain Council and Riot. They were co-plaintiffs. We later joined as a plaintiff as well. And the EIA settled with us. And we were initially given a temporary restraining order. So that happened on Friday, 2 Fridays ago. That day the survey was due. So that temporary restraining order was issued. So all the mining companies were told you don't have to file today. And then that was made permanent last Friday. We reached a settlement with the EIA. They agreed to cancel the survey. And the survey could come back in the form of a notice of comment and rulemaking process. So they could do lawful data collection. So this is not totally over. But this was another example of a political attack on the cryptocurrency industry, the government, abusing its powers. And as Americans, as individuals, as users, as consumers, and companies, it is our job as Americans to protect our rights, because nobody else is going to do that for us. That is our duty as Americans. So when there's government overreach, when the government is not following the laws that pertain to it, when you have governments that are abusing its powers or violating the rights of Americans and Americans' businesses, we must push back. That's when the courts get involved, and the courts have been, thank God they're there, because this was one example where the court stepped in and said, hey, you didn't follow the process. You can't do this. So it's our job. It is our duty as Americans to push back when our rights are being violated. And, we did that. And we're glad that justice was served and rule of law was restored.
Absolutely. I was about to say the same thing you were saying, that thank goodness for the judicial branch, right? And that we have the 3 branches of government. Going back to school, I never really cared about it. Like, oh yeah, we have 3 branches of government, but now I care, I understand.
Now you see why.
Why.
You see why. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of a question for you. This is maybe a bit philosophical, but why do you think we're seeing all of these issues with Elizabeth Warren and the SEC and the things they're doing, breaking the law? Is it that they're desperate and they're trying to move fast and they're dropping the ball in certain spots, or they're just trying to see if they can push things as far as they can, even though they get hit in court? For example, in the debt box situation, right? SEC, the judge threatening to sanction the SEC lawyers, they lied. And then with the EIA, unlawful, SAB, unlawful. What do you think is happening there?
It's hard to know. It's hard to, and there's just so many layers, who ultimately was calling the shots at these agencies, who actually knew what was happening. We didn't just say, hey, let's sue the EIA and launch a lawsuit the next day. I mean, we reached out to the Department of Energy and the EIA. We had several meetings with them ahead of time just to say, can we work this out? Like, do you guys understand that you didn't follow the process? Like, can we negotiate this? Like, are there any other options? We're not happy. We will sue if we have to, but let's have a conversation before we start getting involved in litigation. And it was pretty amazing that despite the fact that we had multiple meetings, half the time you get in the room and the people you're talking to at the agencies have absolutely no idea who you are, what you're talking about. They just got kind of shoved into a meeting and they didn't have the background. So it's hard to know what exactly is going on. Sure. Governments are not the most efficient. They're not known for being efficient. So, there's a lot of layers of bureaucracy, but it's, that's why I'm stressing, it's our job to, protect our rights because they are being attacked. And if we don't, if we don't do that, then we have everything to lose. But my best guess is it's political. It's driven by politically motivated factors, and that's not how it's supposed to be.
Wow. You're absolutely right that we got to fight to maintain these rights. Because, yeah, I mean, I just look at these things and I'm like, what the hell is going on? Like, even if you're trying to stop something, you at least abide by the law, man. Like,
That's the most like ironic thing. And it's crazy how many times, I've seen this now where the regulators want to put rules on us, new rules and regulations on us, on industry, but they're not willing to follow the rules that apply to them. It's like, how hypocritical can you possibly be?
Right. Unbelievable. Well, with that said, we got a couple bills in the House, two in the Senate. Patrick McHenry is trying to push things through. We saw Janet Yellen about a month ago made the statement in front of the House as well, saying we need to pass stablecoin and crypto regulations. I think Jerome Powell is testifying today and tomorrow. He might talk about stablecoins. Is your outlook? Do you think we get stablecoin regulation at least this year, or the election is just too messy right now?
So my prediction or my guess that before Janet Yellen's testimony on stablecoin bill becoming law was like 50-50. It's a coin toss. It seems that a deal has been made between Democrats and Republicans on the bill. That's the hardest thing. So if you can get that, you likely can move it through the legislative process. But what's complicated for a stablecoin bill is that stablecoins is not the priority of Congress today. I mean, if you just spend 5 minutes looking at the mainstream media, we've got a border crisis. We're involved in multiple wars, right? There's like just the government is not properly funded. They're fighting about much bigger things, and that's taking time on the legislative calendar. So is stablecoins going to be a high enough priority that they can fit it into the calendar to get it done? 50-50 shot. But after Secretary Yellen testified just a couple of weeks ago, she called to get a stablecoin bill done, which that to me, I would say that's going to help increase that prioritization of a stablecoin bill. So I'm now at like a 75% chance of getting it done. There's no for sure that's going to happen. There's just so many factors that go into what gets on the legislative calendar every day they're in session. But it is looking pretty optimistic. And again, the hardest thing is just to get, the politics all aligned. House and Senate, Democrats, Republicans, and the White House. Or the administration, and that stuff appears to be in line. So can it move? We will know soon.
Final question here for you. Yesterday, there's news that the SEC blocked or delayed, I should say, the BlackRock Ethereum spot ETF. The next deadline is May 23rd. What do you think? We see the ETH ETF this year?
Well, we would love to see one. It took 10 years to get a Bitcoin ETF. I mean, and just to answer the question very, directly, it's hard to know. I mean, I don't think anyone really knows. I mean, nobody really knew when the spot Bitcoin ETFs were going to get approved, except Gary Gensler himself. I really, really hope it doesn't get drawn out in the same way that spot Bitcoin ETFs did. But we believe that paved the way for additional cryptocurrency spot ETFs. But the politics are not on our side for this one. And Chairman Gensler went down kicking and screaming at the approval of spot Bitcoin ETFs. So if history is a guide, there might be more of a battle to get it done as opposed to just the normal regulatory process that ETFs go through.
Well, we're going to drag them to court again, right? And if that's the way they want to go, we'll give them
Hopefully it doesn't take that.
Yeah. Perianne, always a pleasure. I'm really appreciative of what you and the folks at the Chamber are doing. How can folks support the Chamber of Digital Commerce?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking. We're hosting a conference on May 15th, the DC Blockchain Summit. We'd love to invite everybody to join us. You can go to our website at digitalchamber.org or dcblockchainsummit.com. And then a more tangible way on how you can support the important education and the advocacy work that we do every single day. But again, we need the whole community to help us to really take the community to the next level of adoption. We're hosting Blockchain Education Day the day after on May 16th. And so if you sign up for Blockchain Education Day, we will take you to Capitol Hill to go meet with your elected officials so you can tell them directly about why this technology is important to you and to support policies that help grow and foster our community here in the United States. So come to the DC Blockchain Summit, participate in Blockchain Education Day. That's May 15th and May 16th.
Awesome. Perianne, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Tony. Good to be here.